Hello everybody, this is the kubeadm office hours. Today is the 28th of August 2019. Please add your names to the list of participants and your agenda items. I'm going to post the link of the agenda document in chat quickly. I don't see any new participants. We usually like to start with that. Only 4 people today. So let me share the agenda doc on my screen. Okay. So I wanted to add some PSAs first. This is the first one is something that I assigned to Fabrizio. He already reviewed my PRs to update the test signal for 116. These PRs in particular add new tests for to have something on the dashboard in test grid. And later we can send separate PRs to remove the 113, I guess, tests because they are going outside of the SKU. So yeah, I'm going to ping Fabrizio about this again so that he can LGTM finally. Another PSA is that we are hopefully going to upgrade HCD and Core DNS to new versions. But the problems we are facing is that we need approvals and also somebody from Google to push GCR images. The problem, so Core DNS was already updated, but we found a problem. I think it's in this way. Yeah, so there's a problem if you restart the deployment of Core DNS. The pods are not going to start, and there are errors. I don't understand all the details here, but apparently someone from the Core DNS team, that's Rajan, he said that we would like to update Core DNS to 162 anyway. So our current version is going to be, updated. This in particular is blocked on, I think, Team Hawking, or maybe someone who can push a new image for this Core DNS update. And I think I tested it already, and it works locally. But I think we just need the image at this point to be, available for users. HCD, I mean, let me see. HCD is a similar story. We have a bunch of PRs that are waiting for approvals. Today I poked SIG release to, I think, have a look at this one. Sorry. Yeah, I think I can find it in Slack. Yeah, this one. So it does a blocking operation for a number of locations in the KK repository. And one of the locations is kubeadm. But this is a pretty minor change. It's something that is required for the new HD version. But this is blocked on approval. I also think that we don't have an image. I'm pretty sure we don't have an image for the new HD version yet at GCR. Hopefully this is going to be resolved in time because, it's better to have the signal early for the new component versions. Another one is that, so I saw some movement in the Windows work for 116. This is the PR for the new Windows repository. It's basically SIG Windows tools. So this is where the documentation at basically the Kubernetes website is going to link to, and this is going to basically instruct the users to use a particular PowerShell script or a set of PowerShell scripts. I think this should be updated for 116. Maybe I should add the comment later. So the story there is that users download PowerShell scripts, they run them locally, and supposedly they're going to install, the kubeadm and all the specifics like kubeproxy on Windows does not run as a daemon set, so it downloads a binary compiled for Windows, and also it set up a very specific version of Flannel, which is also uh, specific to Windows. It runs as a service instead of uh, again a daemon set. So I'm just noting that maybe alpha is going to land in 116, hopefully. And like the final PSA is that I created document placeholders for like all the documentation we need to update for 116. I just need to find the time to work on these. These are still placeholders, and the deadline is the 3rd of September. So that's all the PSAs. Does anybody have any topics they want to discuss? Rosti, do you want to share some of the work you're doing right now?
So basically, I'm like in a deliberation process on what to do on the component config side, at least for the next cycle or two. And like today and last week, I was actually talking to, like today I was talking to Fabrizio, but in last week I was actually deliberating over our previous like talk with workgroup component standard, where we actually discussed what to do in general with regards to component config migration and also validation and defaulting. And so right now I'm thinking on a couple of different lines. I'm thinking on getting a distinction between component configs that are specified by users and those that were simply generated by kubeadm. So my idea is to try and avoid migration at all costs, possibly outsource validation to the target component binaries and containers. So we basically invoke them either via the command line or by spinning up a container. And another possible deliberation that we actually talked today with Fabrizio was on whether we should actually even deprecate and eventually drop specifying full-blown component config on like as part of the config file during kubeadm init, and instead to replace this with customize and basically allow users to just go and specify several patches or like a patch set uh, which can be applied to a component config. So this patch set can, in theory, then be used again during upgrade over a newly generated one by kubeadm. And if the patch set does not apply, this is going to basically fail the upgrade and instruct the users that this patch set is not applicable to the current version of the config and that they should provide a new one. So this way we can actually avoid migration and basically keep up with the rules of SIG API machinery. But like right now I'm deliberating on this and scratching my head and dumping some ideas into a document, and I hope that by the next week I can actually put up a little bit more structure to it and like dump it in the open and see what comments you have.
Yeah, this is great. We have way too many question marks, and this is like a blocking item for I mean, it's not a blocking item. We can still move out of KK even if we import Kubernetes into a separate repository, but it's not ideal. And we have to resolve the problem with importing PKG, proxy, PKG, kubelet. I like the patch approach, but if can you clarify at which stage did you consider applying the patches? Because so is it over kubeadm generated defaults?
So right now it's going to be over kubeadm generated defaults. At least that's what I'm thinking of. But it's still not clear to me whether this should be done, for example, during kubeadm init and kubeadm upgrade apply, and basically allow the patched component config to be stored in the config maps and then fetched over into joining and upgrade nodes. And the other way is to basically do as we are actually doing right now with Customize, and basically allow users to do a per node component config patching. But this is, of course, going to be applied only if we actually narrow down the component configs that we actually manage to only those that are stored, like only those that are applicable only to static pods and the kubelet. So basically, we're going to avoid kubeproxy, and probably kubeproxy is going to be managed in the future by another operator.
I see. So you're not considering patching the future section of kubeproxy that is going to be node local?
Well, if we are going to be like going node local, it's going to be hard for kubeproxy. So probably we can actually implement that with some init container, but like that's not the point of this. So, and probably it's going to be like taken over by another operator in the future. So I'll probably avoid that in the proposal and just outsource it to the add-on operator. Rafa, I think that you had some.
Yeah, just a question. Thank you for the work, by the way. The full-blown component config on the configuration, what are you meaning by that? Like the extra args that we allow to pass, or is that something different?
No, that's the component config YAML. So basically, you can actually specify right now in a config file to kubeadm init not only the kubeadm types, but you can actually specify currently a couple of different types. So those are the supported ones right now are the kubelet component configuration and the kubeproxy component configuration. So the kubelet one is, I think, kubelet.config.k8s.io, and it's at the v1 beta 1. Yeah, those are the internal types.
Okay. I completely forgot about that. Thank you.
Yeah, Ross, just wanted to say thank you for working on this. I didn't know that you had taken this item. And if you want to just talk design and UX more, please feel free to ping me outside of the meeting.
Yes, thank you.
Because can definitely think of some ways that we can support users as they're working with different versions of configs when they are owned by the binaries.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Any other agenda topics before triage?
Just a PSI. I started working on removing the IP allocator imports. So basically, I had a chat with Jim Hawken, and it seems like a good fit for Kubernetes utils repo. So I'm reworking it a bit to open a PR there and start remove the imports from kubeadm.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I saw that the IP allocator is used in multiple locations.
Yes.
I think during pre-flight, maybe the most.
It's on validation and let me check. It's on validation, checks and on the init dry run also.
Okay, so what is the response from team about this? Is it considered, a good utility to have there?
Yeah, it's basically just rework one of the functions to make it generic enough and open a PR for the utils repo.
Okay. If you have the PR, just add it here to the.
Okay.
I wanted to add a quick PSA about the import boss topic because so recently I found that we import boss completely ignores underscore test.go files, so it completely does not work for test files. So you can import, the Docker SDK in a test file, and import boss is not going to catch this. So we considered this a bug, and Dims sent a PR to fix it. And he basically his PR extended, import boss to support these files. But then we found out that it also the test files can pull a lot of indirect dependencies from test frameworks and stuff like that. And Jordan commented that this is not ideal. We should only have one level of import, checking one level of imports in test files. And indirect dependency should not be tracked by import boss. So there was no middle ground, and we decided to completely again stop tracking test imports. But this list, the list that we have in import boss for kubeadm is actually much bigger, with something like 20 more entries here. That's a problem. So what we ended up doing is that we import boss now supports a flag that you can run on demand to see these test imports. But my hope is that once we start removing our existing, problem packages, maybe we can run this on demand command and see if there are any leftovers in the tests. Because, we have pretty good parity between what the regular code and the tests import. So maybe we can have this check. I think that the biggest offenders here are the package proxy and the package kubelet. If we remove these, I think that a lot of indirect dependencies are going to be gone. But I just wanted to mention that about import boss. Also, it's kind of buggy. I found some weird bugs when we were merging some HCD PRs. It's the selector regular expressions combined with award prefixes result in some weird stuff. So yeah, I just wanted to add this comment for import boss. All right, anybody have any agenda items before triage?
Yeah, I'll just take this chance to PSA a little bit about what I'm thinking for add-ons work. Been looking at the code on how we can put it into phases, and the logic is seeming to be pretty good. When there's an add-on installer configuration supplied in the kubeadm config and the feature gate is enabled, well, when the feature gate is enabled, we'll use the default add-on installer configuration. When an add-on installer configuration is provided, the user will be overriding whatever the default is. and the way we can pass in values like strategically from kubeadm for defaults programmatically is probably going to be through a JSON patch list that is supported by the API. And then the installer runtime can construct a just-in-time customized file that references the network resources that are needed while still supplying the patch file. So yeah, it's just kind of where the head's at the moment. And also supporting things like delete, so apply, delete, and the kubeconfig through an IO writer, or sorry, IO reader. So yeah, that's kind of where things are at right now. Just needed to get into the code. There's no cap at the moment, so as far as making 116, that sounds pretty unreasonable from a Kubernetes like release team perspective. But I know we're also pretty lenient on alpha features. If not, I have really no reservations as well. I'm just waiting for 117. So however you all feel as a team about that is fine with me.
Yeah, I mean, we probably shouldn't rush it. We should have a pretty clear idea whether our our ideas are good. So I think the cap, you know, you can do the prototyping, but when we have the cap, we can continue brainstorming on that. It doesn't have to be a cap. It can be also, you know, a Google Doc where we can.
I mean, we have many Google Docs on this topic, right? But yeah, but getting a little bit more formal and a little more to the community standards of communication, I agree.
So are we proposing that we can have the patches on the side of kubeadm, and once kubeadm knows, so kubeadm has to know what is the structure of the basically the component config it's patching for a certain add-on. So do we require for kubeadm to download the this defaulted component config from the add-on?
So there's two stories on this. One is that an add-on operator has full access to the Kubernetes API and RBAC. And from that perspective, there's really no code that kubeadm needs to run. It just needs to say, hey, install the operator and let it go do its thing. Except that it needs to tell the operator like what to install, right? So if I have core DNS operator, then kubeadm is probably going to be at some point responsible for, after the core DNS operator is up, applying the core DNS resource. But if we don't have the operator, right, which is definitely the direction I think that people are expecting, but I want to support other use cases, then it's kind of unhelpful to users, like if they don't have like a really easy way to patch things. So a user can always just like pull an add-on onto their file system and then fork it, right? Or even just provide a customized file on their file system that then references a Git repository. And that's like, you know, you can muck around and create files and do anything you want. But I just thought it would be a good API addition so that when you are actually using the add-on installer, if you're trying to do something trivial, that you're not having to make a tempter and then write a customized file that's compliant with that API version and have to vendor all that code in and that kind of thing. So it's just kind of where my head is at. Then you can just supply a JSON patch list and should just work.
I see. So instead of like currently kubeadm, like for kubeproxy, the user is, we had a discussion about component config, by the way, before you joined. You can watch the recording, I guess. Rossi was explaining his current work. So if kubeproxy, we currently allow kubeproxy on the kubeadm side to be like a full-blown component config that is piped from the user to the actual add-on. So I guess the replacement for that has to be something that is on a similar level of UX simplicity. So maybe we have to, if we do patches are okay, as long as we get them right. You know, users don't have to, should not be writing files to a certain folder. Maybe the patch can be inline somehow. I'm not sure, but we basically have to keep the level of UX the same.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there's room as well to support the existing UX, like say the feature graduates from alpha through to GA, that we could use the add-on installer machinery and still support, like if the user passes a kubeproxy configuration, right, then it'll create a default add-on installer configuration that patches in their kubeproxy config. And that's just transparent to the user behind the scenes. They don't need to know that the add-on installer API is being used. But then if they want to do whatever they want, then they can upgrade right to that API instead, and then receive some nice warnings when they're trying to do conflicting things.
Yeah, this can be used to completely replace instead of patching. If the user provides a full API object, component config, it can replace the one in the add-on installer. Maybe.
Yeah, and I'm also particularly excited about allowing users to not install kubeproxy, right? Because there are now several CNIs that completely replace the functionality. So
Yes, I saw it. I think it was it Calico?
Cilium,
Mhm.
Cilium and kuberouter both do it. Yeah.
So realistically, guys, what do you think about like the near future of CNI completely replacing kubeproxy? How many releases of Kubernetes?
I mean, a CNI like Calico or WeaveNet is still going to be completely reliant on kubeproxy, and it's a good default to install. But it's more of a niche for sure to be supporting like the Cilium kuberouter use case. But I think that's the whole point of the add-on installer, is that it really it's removing some of these operational opinions that have been called core, and is opening up the playing field for anybody to be using Kubernetes the way they are supposed to, or the way that they want to, rather.
So
Yeah.
I have one question. Like maybe you can answer me, and in general, if we are on the same page, or basically when we are upgrading, we would like to keep the customizations from the user, right? If they modified something that they created with kubeadm in it. So my question would be, instead of trying to have these patches on the local file system, would it make sense if talking about not using the operator, because when we use the operator will take care of this, but would it make sense if when we do kubeadm in it, we basically upload all the patches that were applied that were on the file system to some config map or to some secret or something similar on the cluster? So then the UX about upgrading would be really easy, in the sense that when you are doing kubeadm upgrade, you don't really need to have these patches on the file system, but they will be downloaded from the cluster. So we have the base, the new base, we apply them on top, and then we apply them to the cluster afterwards. Would that make sense? Or
And listening to you talk really makes me realize some things about this UX that I think we could make more helpful. We've chatted before about like the state store model of kubeadm, and how we would, it's been mentioned that it could be desirable to deprecate those kinds of behaviors where we are automatically and transparently from the user just getting configs from magically named config maps in the cluster, and then using that to persist intent. I think it's more reasonable to expect that a user would have their config file and would check their config and then pass it to the upgrade command. Something that I believe would also be helpful is to have an explicit command. Well, I think it's very useful, like to a cluster operator that has not installed the like initial configuration of kubeadm, to be able to see a history of what was the intent when the cluster was created or upgraded in the cluster. I think that that's a good move to like record history. And then also fetching that history back from the cluster locally to the person that wants to operate on the cluster with kubeadm also makes sense to me. But I don't think that that stuff should be automatic, because it just makes what the source of truth is really difficult to determine. So if we have state configs, add-on installer configuration, different component configs, flags, and whatever their kubeadm config serialized equivalent is, put into the cluster for record keeping, and then we provide UX for users to fetch those records and serialize them to disk as they were installed. That makes a lot of sense to me. But when you are automatically moving the source of truth from init time from the user's laptop into the cluster, and then when upgrades happen, how does a user fork what's in the cluster, right? When they need to change the version of Calico that was installed or something to be compliant with new API versions. That is the only solution that sounds reasonable to me as like an infrastructure operator is that you would actually fetch those things from the cluster or from the authoritative Git repo, right? And I would go to the Git repo first, but a user might not always have that. So that's pretty dissonant from what you're saying. Hopefully, I'm hearing you correctly, and you're hearing where I agree and disagree.
Yep, thank you.
Rossi, what do you think about the pattern of potentially not storing Kubernetes proxy config in the cluster in the future?
I think that it has its ups and downs, but we need to actually deliberate more on it. It's more like a UX thing, to me at least, but it does have some sense to like probably store the patches in the cluster just for the record keeping, but at least automatic patching during upgrade, especially on a changed version of the component config, is not really that desirable, simply because we may end up with some weird situation of like some config that's having matching field names but different default values and stuff like that. So we may end up in some weird situations depending on the changes that configs actually introduce. So basically it's going to be like nitpicking, and probably we can do this automatically whenever the component config version is not changed. And by version I mean the API version, not the version of the config binary itself. But if we actually change it, we will probably need to just at least warn the user, or probably even tell the user to specify like what new version should be these patches applied to.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions, a lot of question marks here. I guess we can continue this discussion another time. Lee, do you want to talk about something else on this topic today?
No. I think everyone's kind of hearing the discussion clearly there. I agree we should talk about it in the future. And I will take notes on best as possible everything we discussed there. We should move to triage.
Yeah, I think we can make this a recurring topic. Like every meeting, we can have a few minutes to discuss this. Like, what is the progress? What people are thinking. It's not super highly urgent, critical urgent, but to get consensus and to get basically uh, agreement from people that we are moving in the right direction. And once you have the cap, then of course everybody can review them. So, all right. Uh, any other topics before triage? All right. Oops. Almost deleted the title. So, I wanted to quickly go over the new tickets in not necessarily in the milestone. There are a couple of interesting ones here. So this is a very complicated one. Basically, someone said that we forgot to. So in the kubelet.conf file we write, we do not leverage certificate rotation of the kubelet, and this is only on the primary control plane node. If you join more nodes, you're going to see this symbolic link as part of the client certificating key inside the kubelet.conf. But on the primary node, we don't do this. And the users have to manually edit the kubelet.conf files if they want to leverage the rotation. So we kind of discussed this. I was proposing different options. Unfortunately, none of them are good because we are going to break existing users if we shift phases around, or if we start making assumptions whether certificate rotation is enabled or not. So this one, I think it's pretty much on top of the list. You can have a look at the ticket and provide some feedback. I added this 116, but after my investigation, I don't think we can action anything out of it for this cycle. So this is a ticket about. Sorry, does anybody have comments now about this? Okay. The next one, this is just a ticket to track our upgrade of core DNS in the cycle. This is a tracking issue about our tests. So this, somebody took this ticket. This is about removing any stray OS exit calls in kubeadm. We want to ideally propagate errors from functions, bubble up errors instead of exiting right away. Somebody took this ticket. This is 116. If nobody takes it, I guess it's not super important for this cycle, so we can punt for the next one.
I think that you can punt it.
Yeah. So I mean, I was thinking that doing another triage, where I remove items, because this is cleanup. This is not feature. We can still, if the contributor has time, they can send for this cycle. So, but soon I'm going to go over all the 116 kind design kind feature, and I'm going to move them to the next cycle because we are approaching feature freeze. I think it's the end of the month. Let me check.
I think that actually code freeze is tomorrow.
Yeah, it's tomorrow.
So it's something like 14 hours away.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to do the triage after code freeze begins, and move some of the items to the next cycle. Okay. kubeadm documentation. I'm working on that. Remove kwalk. Marek is working on that, I believe. There was some questions like different design proposals how we should do this. I think Rosti, you and Yasin prefer the pattern where we return errors from the validators.
Yeah, so basically this is a base library, and it actually has only 3 calls to klog, and a couple of those are RFs, and one is infof, but the info call is basically RF, at least in my opinion. And these calls can actually be translated to just wrapping errors and returning the proper wrapped errors back to the caller.
Yeah, Marek contacted me on private, and I proposed a solution to do, to pass an interface which is kind of more entangled. Like you're saying, we don't really need that maybe. The interface basically allows the user to create a structure that has methods that comply with the demands from KWalk info and stuff like that. But I think your proposal is better. The only downside of this approach with the returning errors is that the diff of this PR is going to be bigger. But if you guys can review this after Marek pings you, maybe we can merge it for 116. All right. Join fails was skipped. Also, this is related to the previous topic we discussed. Like, how do we allow the users to leverage Cilium for kubeproxy replacement? And I think we already merged a PR for that. Maybe not. So basically, during join, actually we haven't merged the PR for that. So during join, we fetch the kubeproxy config map from the cluster. And if the user skipped the kubeproxy add-on phase from init, the kubeproxy config map does not exist, so we have an error during join. And my idea was to not error out if the kubeproxy config map is missing and simply populate, with kubeproxy default. So maybe we can take action on this for 116. What do you think?
Are you suggesting that during the join phase that the kubeproxy config would be populated into the cluster?
No, so we fetch the init configuration, the cluster configuration, we stitch them together, which I don't really like, but we also fetch kubeproxy, and we stitch the kubeproxy inside the kubeproxy internal type inside basically the internal types for kubeadm as component config. And instead of fetching this from the cluster, I was thinking maybe we can simply create a defaulted kubeproxy type or empty structure. I don't know. I just don't want to error out when kubeproxy as a config map is missing.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know like why. What's the error message specifically? Is it failing to serialize it?
No, it's missing. The config map is missing, so it's an error of not found.
I think like we don't have to be concerned with like defaulting an API type in this case. Handling the error should be knowing in the join configuration that it was skipped, and then just not fetching the config map. Right?
Yeah.
Or should we just print a warning?
I think, Rossi, do you know if we can assign nil to that?
I'm not sure actually, but we can just ignore the error, and the kubeproxy configuration is then simply going to be like defaulted during the dynamic defaulting of the whole configuration. So the next time we do actually upload, it's probably going to be uploaded, but I can't remember actually the code that precisely. So in any way, we should probably try to just disable the erroring out and simply treat that as an empty config, which is going to be defaulted during dynamic config.
And potentially show a warning.
Yeah, probably.
All right. I want to take action on this. I'm going to set the PR like today or tomorrow about this, and I'm going to assign reviewers because with the changes of Cilium and the ecosystem, I really want to support at least join, and then maybe we can start thinking about how to do this for upgrade, because we have the same situation there. We expect, if you start a cluster with init but you skip kubeproxy as an add-on, upgrade is going to fail if the config map is missing.
Can somebody educate me as to why we need to pull the kubeproxy config during the join config or during the join?
Yes, so I think it was added because we used to have, Yasin, you can confirm if you already removed that. We used to fetch the kubeproxy configuration, perform node local checks for IPVS modules, which is kind of absurd.
For this one, they are removed.
Yes, so we no longer need to fetch the kubeproxy config because Yasin removed the validators for IPVS.
Okay, so we should just rip the code out. And it sounds like as well, like that code should have never been critical either.
Yes, so maybe
yeah, there's no reason that the kubeproxy configuration would be critical for a join phase, since that's all in the control plane.
yes, I completely agree. So maybe we can just rip it out at this point.
So this
Yeah,
was
I
like,
mean, it makes sense that we would have had a pre-flight check there, but yeah, that should have been best effort with a warning.
so this is like one of the side effects from the effort of trying to like keep parity between all component configs. So basically, it makes sense for kubelet's config to be fetched during join, but it doesn't make sense for kubeproxies. But since these are both treated by the same interface, which is the component config interface of kubeadm, they're simply just fetched up whenever we actually fetch configuration from the cluster. And if some of them fails, it's basically we just bail out and say we couldn't fetch something.
I see. So maybe we just need to add some more specificity to the component config pull interface, because that sounds like it was a little leaky.
Yeah, basically we just want to redesign that with mind of UX and how to not migrate things, and how we should use add-on operators and stuff like that. So this is actually what I'm deliberating these days on. And once that's done, we can actually clean up this sort of stuff.
Cool, that makes sense. Yeah.
And also it becomes a question whether we should even pull the kubelet configuration from the cluster, because it makes sense for node replicas, but maybe not for nodes that have a completely different setup. I have a major disagreement with some of the principles of the kubelet configuration in general, but this is really a topic for another time.
I have some ideas on how we could support central config management for arbitrary kubelet configs, based off of other experience configuring variants of software in several environments. It kind of pivots around like node labels and annotations, and then like targeting those versions and those labels and annotations and having a base kubelet config. So.
Yeah, this sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
If you can outline it in a issue or a doc, we can have a look. I like this.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move to the next one. How much time we have? 8 minutes. All right. This one is pretty clear. We sort of agreed that the kubeadm types should have object meta or part of object meta inside of them. This is going to allow us to apply customized patches on them without requiring, customize requires this at least. If the YAML doesn't have it, customizing is going to error out. But if we add this, we currently have warnings from our strict marshalling, because metadata is not, object meta is not part of our types. So maybe we can add this for the next iteration of the kubeadm configuration. Okay, update HCD. We already had discussions about this last time. So quickly, let's see if we can open a couple of PRs. This one is fixing a typo. This is something that Fabrizio should take a look at. He is already reviewing this. Yeah, it's basically cleanup. We can hopefully merge it soon. Yeah, so Rossi, I LGTM this one. I had a look at the diff multiple times. I couldn't find any problems, but I requested that the contributor modifies slightly the. Sorry, let me find it. I requested that they should modify the naming of the function to basically target component config kinds. I'm not sure you agree with that. Instead of component strings.
I think it's okay.
All right. And also I requested that we try to print the user value as well, because if it makes it easier for somebody to try to find where the actual warning is coming from if they look for their value in the config. Yeah, so this is already LGTM. If we find something else, we can, I guess, fix it later. All right. This is bumping HCD, but it's all code because we don't have the image yet. This is the PR from Marek that is removing KWalk. By the way, I just wanted to mention this. So in the ticket, so this ticket is not only about KWalk. We have to, so yeah, so this is not closing it. There's another item here that Jordan pointed out. So basically, there's another package. It's the aggregate errors from API machine.
Yeah, this one is probably going to be. It's actually simpler than the first one, than KLog, but it's probably going to be larger just as a diff set.
Yeah, it should be pretty simple. Yeah. All right. This one is touching kubeadm by Yasin. It's basically me moving utils metrics to the component-based repository. I found out that basically component-based is serving as the purpose as also as a repository for daemons in general, or server utilities. It's not only about generic component configuration or utils for component config or components. It's also about server side stuff. And apparently this was in the CAP. We had a discussion here with Logical Cam. And also I think Rosti spoke with Stefan about this. But yeah, I guess components like kubeadm that imports a component base, Go imports are going to allow them to skip, I guess, these server-related imports that we don't really care about. I mean, unless we start exposing metrics at some point. I have no context on this one. It's touching kubeadm 12 days ago. Maybe we already triaged this one. Yeah.
We already saw this one.
Okay, So we're in a pretty good shape for the cycle. Nothing breaking, nothing major. Hopefully, the CA signal is going to be good. So yeah, I'm going to work on docs later. Any final comments? We have a couple of minutes.
If you have something urgent, please tell me. But yeah.
Oh yeah, Rafa. By the way, a quick comment. I was testing the. Do you remember the HCD problem where we basically it was timing out?
Yep.
So I tried to reproduce this multiple times and I couldn't. And then I attempted to do concurrent join again, and it started failing with different errors. I just wanted to let you know that I found some time to check this.
Okay, thank you. The reporter also replied on that bug.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of happened, but it's not consistently reproducible.
Okay, thank you for the heads up.
All right, so we're gonna call it. Thanks everybody. See you next week.
Oh,
See you.
just
Bye.
final
Bye,
things. I did do
See
the
you.
kind dep update, so there's that.
Yeah, we're gonna take a look at this later. All right.
Okay, thanks.